My name's Hugh and I have a tomato glut. We have a greenhouse full of ripening tomatoes. It smells wonderful, they taste wonderful, but even I can't eat them all. So today we're going to pick some. We're going to make something very similar to sun-dried tomatoes, exactly the same except it's not dried in the sun. Join us, we'll show you how. The greenhouse is full of ripening tomatoes, far more than we can eat fresh, and we love sun-dried tomatoes. So, using a dehydrator or an oven, perfectly possible to make something exactly the same as a sun-dried tomato yourself. Let me show you how. First job is to pick some nice ripe tomatoes. We grow a lot of different varieties, but they can all be dried and used in different ways. And as beautiful as that harvest of tomatoes looks, and it's massive, there must be 20 pounds of tomatoes there or more, it's far more than we can eat fresh. So on to the preserving. So before we do anything else, we're going to give these a good soak, and as you can see, some of them have picked up little soil splashes, little bits of dirt. Going to get everything lovely and clean before we process. Before I cut up the tomatoes, I'm going to sharpen my knives. Honestly, a sharp knife is almost essential for cutting up a tomato. Now, I've got every fancy sharpening system out there, from Japanese Waterstones to Lansky sharpening systems. But for kitchen knives, one of these modern electric sharpeners with a coarse and a fine setting is absolutely fine and really quick if you use your knives a lot. So, about 12 passes is all it takes on the fine, unless I've let it get really blunt or damage the blade, and it's absolutely sharp enough for every kitchen job. And it, again, takes a minute or two, but makes the job safer and quicker. With these sort of standard salad tomato sizes, I like to cut them into about 1/4 inch thick chunks. Now in the middle, there'll be one that has a piece of stalk in it. You can see the little green bit of stalk. Just nick that out with your knife tip, because that doesn't dry particularly well. To my mind, some of the absolute finest sun-dried tomatoes come from these super sweet little cherry ones. I'm still nicking out the stalks just to be safe. And these black ones, well, so-called black ones, more of a sort of chocolatey brown almost, are fabulous, and what a great flavour. If you happen to grow some of the yellow ones, some red ones, you can make the most attractive looking sun-dried tomatoes or oven-dried tomatoes that you'll ever see if you can get a variety of colours going. When I've got a tray full, I like to lightly season them with a little bit of salt. Just a little bit. Don't want to overdo it, don't want them to taste salty. And then a sprinkling of oregano, Italian herbs, whatever you like. None of this is necessary, it's just about flavour. And lastly for me, our own garlic powder. Go very lightly with this because it's a strong old taste. Now these go into the dehydrator at 57 centigrade, 135 Fahrenheit for about 6 hours. If you haven't got a dehydrator, put them in your oven, lowest as it'll go, gas marker half, you know, same sort of temperatures, and crack the door open and leave it in there for roughly half an hour. There we go. Lots and lots of trays of tomatoes in the Excalibur dehydrator. About a square metre full there. Next job is to set the timer for 6 hours and we'll take a look. When you've dried them right, this should be what you get. Sort of like almost like a rubbery consistency to the thing. It's got to be not wet, but not rock hard. You will get a few, like this one, where you've sliced a bit thinly that have gone a bit hard. And I'll show you a use for those later on. They're not wasted. It is ever so hard to get them to dry completely evenly. However evenly I try and slice, I always find when drying tomatoes that some dry to where I want them at a different time to others. So I tend to keep a jug by the dehydrator. Once an hour I have a look, take out the ones that are ready, leave the ones that want a little bit longer. And what you want is that sort of rubbery feel to them, that nice flexible. You don't want them dried hard, although, as I said, when they do dry hard, we have other uses for them. And all I do is get some sterilised jars, and I sterilise them. I pop them in the stock pan, cover them in water, bring that water to the boil, and I'll leave them there for 5 minutes, then take them out with tongs and let them cool. You can do it in the oven, just round about 100 centigrade, whatever the boiling point of water is in Fahrenheit, I can't remember. And again, leave them in that oven to get hot. Take them out, let them cool. And then I pack them into fairly small, sort of 4 ounce, half-pound jam jar. That sort of size jars, not into the big pound sized jars. And top the jar right up with olive oil. You want to cover all the tomatoes with oil. Now, once you've done that, pop a lid on. I tend to refrigerate those because tomatoes are right on the border of whether they're acid enough to avoid botulinum, botulism. And if you look in the canning books, you can water bath can tomatoes, but the advice is generally to up the acidity a little bit with lemon juice, or you can pressure can. But what that means is botulism is a faint risk, but a risk. And to avoid that in any tomatoes in oil that I make, I pop them in the back of the fridge. I use small jars because then once you start them, you can use them up fairly quickly. That then is how we jar dried tomatoes in olive oil, but we've got a lot more. And one of the ways that we will also preserve them is to vacuum pack them and then freeze them. Don't worry if you haven't got a vacuum packer, put them in a plastic bag, squeeze the air out, seal the bag, freeze them fairly flat because you don't want them frozen into a big lump like that. You want to be able to take a few out when you need them. But we do have a vacuum packer. We use it for all sorts of things, and it's a tremendously useful thing. In the freezer, it really avoids freezer burn on your products. So let me show you how we use it. This is a Food Saver vacuum sealer, one of the better makes on the market. And inside is a roll. And that roll is sealed only on 2 sides. So if I pull through the length I want, I can decide how big a bag I want to create. And when I've got the right length, I just run this sharp blade across, and that leaves me with basically an open tube of the length that I want. So I need to seal one end before I put the food in. The way I do that is to hook it into that little trough, seal up the vacuum sealer, and then press this button, which does sealing. That will take a few seconds, and when the light goes out, it will have heat sealed the end of the film all the way across the bag. Lights out, and you can probably see there's a line all the way across the bag, and it's completely sealed. Next part of the process, fill my bag. We'll take our dried tomatoes, pop them in, and we'll try and spread them out to get a roughly even layer across the inside of the bag. Once I've done that, go back to the Food Saver. Put the edge of the bag in position. Lock down the Food Saver, and here is a button that doesn't just seal the bag, but it sucks the air out first, then seals it. Lights are out, have a listen. You may catch a faint hiss. That's the vacuum letting go. And there we have it. Vacuum packed dried tomatoes. And they take almost no room. Look how thin they are. We can get masses of tomatoes in a small area of our freezer. Now we've got 5 packs of vacuum packed dried tomatoes. And those 5 packs weigh 330 grams, but they came out of 2,500 grams of fresh tomatoes that we grew. So you can see how much of a weight saving, how much of a space saving processing those tomatoes is. And I tell you what, the flavour beats anything you buy commercially. So well worth doing. Those will go into the corner of a freezer for us. And space is always a consideration. We try to be as self-reliant as we can, but we run 4 large freezers. We have an outbuilding specially as a pantry for all the dried and canned goods that we produce. Space, always an issue. So anything that maximises the use of space is a real bonus. I promise to show you 1 or 2 other things. This, for me, is the hidden secret of running a dehydrator or of drying tomatoes. Tomato powder. Dry them hard, bung them into a powerful blender, blitz them to a powder, put them in an airtight jar. Replaces commercial tomato puree, because if you put a few spoons of that into any sauce or soup, it thickens it. It gives you a massively intense tomato flavour. Something I love to do with it. 2 or 3 tablespoons of that into a 2-pound loaf of bread, along with some dried oregano, some garlic powder, and you get this warm loaf that tastes like spaghetti bolognese. Just a slather of salted butter over the top. Honestly, it's a meal in itself. The only problem is actually trying not to eat the whole 2-pound loaf in one sitting. We also can our own tomatoes, and you can water bath can them, so there's no need to buy an expensive pressure canner, or you can pressure can, slightly different techniques. If you'd like to see how we do that, leave us a comment down below and we'll do a video on canning your own tomatoes. But I hope what you can see there is there are many, many ways of preserving a glut of tomatoes. I don't think of them as a glut, because actually when you get into preserving, you want to preserve a decent amount in one time. So actually having a large quantity in one go means that I can have my tomato powder in the winter, that Fiona can break out a packet of those and they go into cheese on toast. And it's like a little mini pizza. Wonderful stuff. Well worth doing, and well worth making sure you got enough to make it worthwhile. So that's a short foray into what we do with our tomatoes. Dried as frozen, dried as jarred in olive oil, but also tomato powder, that little secret, and I'll tell you what, that is so worth doing. Canning, always a possibility, so that we have our own tomatoes throughout the year. If you're enjoying this kind of content, can you spare us 5 seconds for a thumbs up down below? And if you'd like to see more on preserving tomatoes, if you want to see canning, if you'd like to see other food preservation techniques that we get up to, leave us a comment. We've got a lot on at the moment. There's a lot more food to preserve right now. And we do everything from sand clamps to dehydration to canning, all sorts of different techniques. We'd love to share them with you, but only if they're of interest. And if you do want to see that kind of thing, hit the subscribe button, the bell next to it, and you'll hear every time we upload a new video. Whatever you do. Come back and see us soon. Take care.